Hey, I lost my internet connection there for a while. I don't know what happened. So basically, I'll continue from where I think I got disconnected. I was talking about impermanent loss, and impermanent loss is basically the loss that you make, uh, that you get if you're providing liquidity rather than what you would have made if you had just held to your tokens. So for example, if when at the time of adding liquidity we are adding 100 USDC with one Solana, and Solana at that point is worth $100, then we are adding $200 worth of liquidity. Now, suppose you let this stay for a week, and then after a week you're withdrawing your liquidity. And at that point in time, when you're withdrawing, you withdraw 104.88 USDC with 0.9 Solana, and Solana is now priced at $110 with an additional 5.72 USDC as LP fees. Now, if you had just held to your tokens and not added any liquidity, then in the same time you would have had $210 at the end of this period. However, when you added liquidity, you ended up with $209.6, which means there was an impermanent loss of about 40 cents. Now, this impermanent loss can actually be overcome. For example, if you wait a little longer and the price of Solana falls down let's say it comes down to 108, then at that point in time, when you do the same calculation, you would actually have a little profit. So there are ways, obviously there is this simple way of just holding on to your liquidity position and hoping the price goes in your favor, and you basically close your position in a profit. However, there are also other ways wherein you can create certain strategies to counteract these impermanent loss, and uh, eventually the goal is always to end up in profit. So even after providing LP, you actually end up in profit. But as a liquidity provider, you are considered a profitable liquidity provider when you're ending up without impermanent loss. So for example, if the price of Solana then further goes down to $108, then you would have a little more Solana, a little less USDC, and some more fees that would have been generated. That total would actually come out greater than if you had just held those tokens. So in that case, you're actually closing your position in a profit. Otherwise, you're always if you're closing at 209, you still have a profit, but you do have some impermanent loss. And when you close the position, you are basically realizing that loss, and now the next position will be a different story. This position ended up with some loss. So these are basically some of the basics of liquidity providing, and the pools, or you might call the platforms, the protocols, the tools that are available currently. Now Meteora obviously is actually inspired from the Trader Joe order book, and they're adding a different mechanism, a different way of adding liquidity, which is more efficient compared to the options we've looked at, the AMM and the CLMM pools. So now let's move on to Meteora, and let's first look at basically what I consider to be the heart of Meteora's ecosystem, the vaults. And these vaults basically do two things. They optimize your capital while continuously monitoring your risk. So obviously we haven't had some huge liquidation events in the recent times. So plus that, as well as the factor that most of the platforms have actually maintained caps on how they are letting the liquidity on their platforms being utilized. So the risk has very much been controlled in the past. However, recently Camino did remove the caps on the Solana pools that were available, and that actually creates a factor of additional risk that was not present, let's say 2 weeks ago, on the same platform. And now if you're actually using multiply, Camino feature multiply, then you're actually exposing yourself to liquidation risk in case of Solana price fluctuations, which was not present before because they had capped on how much Solana could be lent from their pools, and that was how they were controlling these liquidations. But now they've removed these caps, and the balance would basically be found by the market organically. So now let's come back to the Meteora vaults, and yeah, let me. Yeah, so Meteora vaults are accessible in this top section. You can hover over more, and you'll be able to see the vaults. When you scroll to when you open the vaults page, these are the single asset vaults that are available on Meteora as of now: USDC, USDT, Sol, ST Sol, M Sol, and UXT. So basically, when you're depositing capital into any of these vaults will automatically distribute that capital over the three major lending platforms on Solana, which are Save, which was formerly Solend, MarginFi, and Camino. And as you can see, there's a real-time liquidity allocation pie chart available, and you can always see how much liquidity is being sent to which protocol. And even for if we talk about Camino, then we know Camino has different markets: the Jito market, the main market, and there's also the Athena market. So whatever, and the JLP market as well. So whatever assets are being sent to these specific market, these are being tracked in real time, and you can see them here. When you open up any of the vaults page, you can easily deposit or withdraw your liquidity, and basically you're adding liquidity, and there is no lock on these deposits. So you can, if you deposit right now and 2 minutes later you want your liquidity to be returned, that is very much possible. You do not have any time locks. And you can also monitor some of the performance, like if you look at the USDC vault, then this is the APY performance for the vault. And the last point will always be here, because I don't know, I've never seen this go up. The last point is always down here. Basically, I don't know if they've not the calculation hasn't been made to plot a point on this graph, which is why it's a default 0 point. So these are the Camino vaults that are available, and as we go further, you'll understand why these vaults I consider to be the core of this Meteora ecosystem. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the dynamic pools on Meteora. These pools are basically your standard AMM pools that we spoke about, but these pools are much more capital efficient. And the reason why these pools are capital efficient is because when we spoke about AMM pools and we saw that liquidity is being provided from a range of 0 to infinity, and most of the liquidity is basically not being utilized. So what basically these dynamic pools do is they take this unutilized liquidity that we have in the liquidity pool, and they take this liquidity and put it into the dynamic vaults, wherein they're spread out to different lending platforms where they earn additional yield. So now not only would you have liquidity in the pool which is rather in the active range and generating fees for you, but also the liquidity that was not generating fees and just being not being used in the pool, that is also generating additional yields through the lending that is being done by the dynamic vaults. So basically when we look at dynamic pools, there's a base layer or a backend layer of dynamic pools and a front layer of liquidity pools, and to generate additional yields and to increase the efficiency of your capital, these pools lend your capital and generate additional profits for you. So any questions, any queries, anything in chat? Okay. Now coming to the dynamic pools, basically when you might see a pool wherein both these assets have dynamic vaults, like in this case Sol and MSol both have their respective vaults. In this case, liquidity from both the sides, when you're adding liquidity in these pools, it'll always be in a 50-50 proportion, like you'll add half Solana and half MSol. So in this case, since both these assets have vaults, unused capital from both these assets will be lent out and generate additional yields. However, when you see a pool like this pool, MetaV and Sol pool, in this case, MetaV does not have a dynamic vault, whereas Sol does have a dynamic vault. So the Sol that is being unused, that is the only capital that will be lent out and generate additional yields. However, the unused MetaV will just be in the pool, just like any standard AMM pool. Additionally, some of these pools, before that, talking about some statistics or some metrics that you can look at are basically, so you can look at the 24-hour volume. This is the volume that the pool has generated, the swap volume that has gone through the pool, and that is for this specific pool is about 4.3 million. 24-hour yield, this $1,077 is actually coming from the lending that is being done from the unused capital liquidity that was in the pool. And this 24-hour fees, this is basically the fees that has been generated through the swap volume of this $4.3 million. So as you can clearly see, the liquidity, if you had provided liquidity in the pool, in a standard AMM pool, you would have just generated this much of fees. However, this additional, which is almost about 3 times more than the liquidity fees, is being generated through lending of the unused capital. So basically you are actually generating 4 times what you would have generated in a standard AMM pool. Now, some of these pools might also have this LM APR. This is the liquidity mining APR. And so some protocols, basically when they launch their tokens, to incentivize liquidity providers to add liquidity to their pools, they add some additional rewards. And these awards are additional rewards are basically distributed through these liquidity mining farms. So for example, if we look at a pool that has a farm, you can always scroll to this page and look at all the pools in this page have a liquidity mining farm ongoing. So if I, for example, if I check this pool, there is a farm available. So when I'm adding liquidity to this pool, then in exchange for adding those liquidity, I'm also getting some liquidity tokens in return, which basically acts as our receipt to our to the liquidity in the pool. So that those liquidity tokens you can take and you can deposit them in a farm, and those tokens will generate additional uh, r- the additional rewards that have been set by the protocol or the project. Those would be distributed as per your liquidity contribution, your the percentage of liquidity you have compared to the total liquidity in the pool. And like the dynamic vaults, you can anytime stake or at any time unlock and unstake your tokens, and in the same way you can at any point deposit and withdraw these tokens. So this is basically the liquidity, the dynamic pools available on Meteora, and these are the pools that are available with the farms. Additionally, there are some LST pools. So the LST pools have been highlighted separately because even though they are the same as dynamic pools, but they are slightly different in the way that they behave, in the sense that uh, usually when any liquidity pool is getting the price of both the tokens present in the pool, it is done keeping in mind the total value locked in the pool, as well as an oracle price feed. So in cases of LST pools, Meteora has basically not made use of those oracle price feeds, and rather uh, take the price of the LST tokens from the chain itself. And what basically this does is, when we're adding liquidity in a stable pool, like a pool wherein we have Solana and Marinade Solana. So now we know that every epoch, Marinade distributes the rewards to MSOL. And what that basically means is that every epoch, the price of MSOL slightly increases relative to Sol. That's how these LSTs function, right? The price of these LSTs always increasing very slightly every epoch, every Solana epoch. That is, I think, about 4 days or 5 days. I don't exactly remember, but something like that. So when this price of one asset is consistently increasing over time, that creates a scenario where your impermanent loss is actually always increasing over time. And by not using the oracle price feeds and rather taking the price from directly on chain for these LST pools, this impermanent loss is being minimized in these dynamic LST pools. So yes, they behave exactly like dynamic pools, but additionally they also help you negate the impermanent loss which is created by the nature of the LST tokens. So again, this mitigates the risk to your liquidity. And then finally we have these multi-token pools. So these are basically pools wherein more than two tokens can be deposited in the same pool. And some of these pools are basically the majority liquidity providers for for wormhole bridge. So when you're swapping from EVM or let's say Sui or C or whatever other chains to Solana, or from Solana to these other chains, the liquidity for these bridging transactions are being provided through some of these pools. So I hope people have been able to follow up till here. Now we will get into the DLMM pools, the dynamic liquidity market maker pools. So to give you an idea, dynamic liquidity market maker pools are basically very similar, not very similar, they're actually CLMM pools. The only difference is the way that the liquidity is being used and distributed in these pools. So when we talk about CLMM pools, so for example, I've tried to illustrate exactly when you're providing liquidity in a CLMM pool, then again the token price of that of the tokens will follow this curve at all given points in time. However, in a DLMM pool, the dynamic liquidity, please excuse this, these are basically the same pictures. I overlaid this bin setup so that you can get a rough idea of what is exactly happening. There is a continuous liquidity being provided here on both sides. Whereas in the case of DLMM pools, there is bins that are being used that are at fixed price point. So if you look at this graph here, what this straight line signifies compared to this curve to the downside is, during this time period, which is basically the range of the price range, a fixed price range, which is the width of this bin, the width of this bin, all transactions are done at the exact same price, which means zero slippage. And then when the price shifts from one bin to the next bin, there is some small slippage. So instead of this continuous slippage, yeah, this is not a model which completely eliminates slippage from our transactions, but this is a model which reduces slippage significantly. There is some small slippage, and then there is the next price point at which this bin is, the next one, or this one, the next price point, wherein all transactions in this bin will happen exactly at that same price. Even though this width of this bin signifies that this bin is actually catering to a very tiny range, but it is a range. But in that range, the swaps will happen with a zero slippage at a fixed price point, which is basically the graph of how the liquidity would work. So let's suppose in this particular bin for Solana USDC pool, let's suppose there is $1 million liquidity available. So until and unless there is volume exceeding $1 million, the price of Solana will be fixed and people will actually get zero slippage transactions. Transactions will be, the fees will still be paid to the liquidity providers, but there will be zero slippage for up to 1 million volume. But if the volume exceeds that $1 million and the price of Solana shifts to, let's suppose, if it goes higher or if it goes lower, then there is some small slippage in that trade. And then we get the swaps, the remaining swap volume at the next bin price point. I hope you're able to follow what I'm trying to say here with the bins and this step graph compared to this curve graph. And then moving on to the next part, and then in these DLMM pools, right now we'll take any random pool for an example. We have three strategies that are available to us using which we can actually place our liquidity, and these three strategies can also be stacked on top of each other to to customize the way of how our liquidity is being placed in these bins at the specific price point. And this customization offers you a way to utilize your personalized strategies to exponentially increase the efficiency of your capital, and thereby generating a lot more fees compared to the CLMM pools. So if we talk about the spot strategy, if we talk about the spot strategy, in the spot strategy, when you select that, uniform distribution of liquidity is done, and this distribution, uniform distribution, is basically turning your position into a standard CLMM position. So if you were to deposit only using the spot strategy in a Meteora DLMM pool, or in a, for example, let's say Radium CLMM pool, you are basically doing the exact same thing. Like, even though it's a DLMM pool and that's a CLMM pool, they will do the exact same thing. And this is this is probably one of the easiest way to get started by getting started into providing liquidity into various pools. You don't have to do much calculation figuring out what you just need to figure out what range you want to provide your liquidity in, and then you select spot and you're ready to go. And basically this in some cases, a simple spot strategy can also be much more efficient compared to the other complex and custom strategies. It just depends on how the market or the token pair is behaving. Not even the market can have very low volumes, but the token you have selected might have very high volume. So depending on how the market is behaving for that specific token pair, even the spot strategy can be more efficient than the other complex and advanced strategies. So it's like a if you don't want to figure out anything, you don't have much time to do analysis and all of that, you can just start off with your spot strategy. And then the next one is basically the curve strategy. This basically, in this strategy, as you can see, the shape, this triangular shape basically signifies how your liquidity is being placed. So the height of your bins basically signifies how much relative liquidity you will have in this bin. So since this is shorter than this one, this bin will have lesser liquidity than this one, and this one will have lesser liquidity than this one. So what this basically means is, if your price is not very volatile and it stays very close to the current price range, in those cases this is a much more efficient strategy, because most of your liquidity will be in this active price range compared to these the outer widths of your range, wherein you have the least amount of liquidity available at both ends if the price goes up or down. So this is an efficient way to provide liquidity in stable pools like LST pools, or stable coin pools like USDC, USDT. And then the third strategy that is available to us on Meteora is the bid ask strategy. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped the uh, slide for this one. So this final strategy of bid ask strategy is basically the inverse of the curve strategy, and herein most of your capital is being placed to the ends of the range rather than the active price. So this strategy can basically act as a DCA in or out strategy for your positions. And these are the three strategies that we have available by default. Now, using these three, we can stack them up and create our own custom strategies in these DLMM pools. Before we do get into all of that, I also wanted to illustrate to you another part of these Meteora pools that we look at. So whenever basically you're considering any token pair, then you will notice that, for example, if we take Sol USDC pool, there are many pools that are available to us. However, these pools are separately these are unique pools because there is some attribute of these pools that differs from each other. So for example, if we take a look at this pool which has a bin step of 8, and we take a look at this pool with the same bin step, then you'll notice there is a difference on how much fee is being charged on each transaction. So these bins and the fee being charged on transactions vary with each pool, and the fee is very self-explanatory, that the fee is basically the fee that will be charged on for each swap that is made through this pool. The other factor that varies is the bin step. And what basically the bin step means, bin step signifies the range in which you will be placing your liquidity. To give you an illustration, a visual example of what bin steps actually mean and look like, I've created this. And in this, as you can see, this is the price line, wherein the price, this is the current price, and this is minus percentage, and this is plus percent. So when we're selecting a bin step which has a bin step of 4, then you're actually providing liquidity in this range with 69 bins. And let's suppose you're adding $100 liquidity in each of these bins. So a thing that you need to notice, you will see that these bins compared to the bin step which has 20, the bins here are much thinner compared to these ones. But the height of these bins is higher than the height of these bins. So what is basically happening, if you deposit $100 worth of liquidity into each of these pools with varying bin steps, you will be providing that $100 liquidity in a much smaller range in a lower bin step pool. But because the range is smaller, your your liquidity will be more concentrated, which means this height, which is the concentration of liquidity represented by the height of these bins, shows that you have more liquidity within the smaller price range. However, in the case of a larger bin step, the width of these bins increase, which means the price point at which these swaps happen, that price point increases. And you get a wider range in which your liquidity will be placed. So this is basically a visual representation of what the varying bin steps look like. As you increase your bin step, you're covering more range. But if since you're covering more range with the same amount of capital, you will have lesser and lesser liquidity in each as you go higher, as you increase your bin step. So to summarize, compared to the standard CLMM pools, DLMM pools offer zero slippage bins. They offer higher capital efficiency by allowing you to precisely concentrate your liquidity beyond the price range. You can obviously choose your price range, and you can choose the bin step which decides how what the range is, but in addition to that, you can also use various strategies like spot, curve, and bid ask, and stack them to create customized strategies that increase your capital efficiency exponentially. And lastly, using these bins structure, we also have an environment where we can use dynamic fees. So basically what happens is, as we saw, all pools have a fixed fee that is being charged on each swap. However, when you look at this pool, this is the base fees that is being charged on each transaction, no matter what. However, as volatility in the price of one or both the token increases, there is a dynamic fees in place wherein your fees can go up to 10%, from 0.04 to up to 10% of each swap. And as the volatility increases, this fees increases. So even though the base fees is 0.04, the current fees is very slightly but higher than the base fees, because Solana is volatile compared to USDC. And yeah, and even more so today. So we see that this dynamic fees is slightly higher. So right now, any swaps going through this pool are charging this percentage of fees. Now, yes, for Solana and Sol USDC, this increment might be very small, but if we take a look at some, let's look at this token. So in this case, the base fees is 1%. However, currently, because this is a meme coin, and I don't know much about this meme coin, but clearly it is volatile right now. And so on each transaction going through this pool, there is a fees of 2.6% that is being charged. And if the volatility increases, again, volatility does not mean the price increases. It could even be price decreasing. The token could be falling in price right now very quickly, or it could be going up, or it could even just be ranging very quickly with a very high volume, which is creating some volatility in the token around the active price range, which is increasing the dynamic fees. So these DLM pools also have this additional feature wherein in volatile situations, you not only are making the base fees, but actually making additional fees. So in addition to when you're highly optimizing your capital to capture volume, and then in volatile conditions, those fees are being increased multifolds, then you're basically you creating a scenario wherein you can generate a lot more fees compared to any standard CLMM pool. And that is basically why DLMM pools are such a revolutionary product. And yeah, they're just amazing. I've been using them for quite a while. And again, DLM, Meteora does have an stimulus program wherein they will airdrop about 10% of their total tokens to Meteora users. Basically, when you're adding, let's say, $100 worth of liquidity to any pool, then you're accumulating 100 points each day. And let's say that $100 generate $1 in fees for one day. Then for every dollar generated in fees, you get about 1,000 points. So in total, if you put in $100 and generate $1 worth of fees, you'll get 100 points from liquidity and 1,000 points. So total 1,100 points for that day. So yeah, I think that'll be all for today. Um, Based on any feedback that I get, I'll try to host another session wherein we can dive further into DLMM pools and talk about how, to find pools to add liquidity in, how to create strategies, how to create your how to mitigate some risk using different strategies. We can do a session on that based on whatever feedback you guys give me, and I'll move ahead accordingly. So thank you. Good night.